We have a really excellent panel for you right now. It's going to be hosted by Saagar Enjeti of Rising. He's also the co-author of The Populist Guide to 2020, A New Right and Left Are Rising. And just for clarification, Crystal Ball was supposed to be co-hosting with Saagar today. She is not feeling well, so she's not able to do it this afternoon, but she's going to make her best effort to join us later today for the karaoke world record attempt song and to play the virtual Pictionary. So we hope to see Crystal in a couple of hours here, and hope she's feeling better for sure. So Saagar, I think you're probably qualified to take care of this on your own, or do you need Crystal?
Well, I certainly miss her, although I would pay big money to watch her do karaoke. So I hopefully will have to tune in a little bit later. Not something I have yet seen on Rising.
Could I interject just very briefly, just because
course.
this is a pet peeve? The American pronunciation is karaoke. It's incorrect. Nobody will correct it. Well, the Asian American Journalists Association does now. It's karaoke. Kara means empty, like in karate. Empty hand, but this is empty orchestra. I know I won't change anything, but since you guys are, I assume intelligent, progressive, at least intelligent people, then I'd want to say, please call it karaoke. Pet peeve. Sorry.
All right,
okay.
Jodi,
no, it's okay. That? And you know what? Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to have to try and remember that the next time.
Jodi's going to be helping to host that one. So Jodi, tell you.
I'll try.
All right. Thank you for the clarification. We always appreciate that. So we're really honored to have Saagar Enjeti. You and Crystal are both doing amazing work on Rising. I think it's a really important perspective for people to hear. Both coming from the left and the right. On all these different issues that we care about. And so, just thank you for your work, and I'll let you take it from here.
Well, thanks very much, Mike. I think one of the things Crystal and I wanted to get across just before we get started and we all introduced ourselves was just about how important the issue of money in politics really is, how it can pervade almost every aspect of political life, of decision making. I began my career kind of as a White House correspondent, a Pentagon correspondent. And if you really want to get an insight into how things work, you have to understand the lobbying industry, K Street, and how exactly who is getting paid and what's getting paid and what's getting pushed. And one of the things I wanted to highlight actually is that they're one of the most recent investigations that just opened my eyes, even though I knew it was real. It's from BuzzFeed News called the FinCEN Files. And they talk about in those files the elaborate network through which billions, and we're talking about tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of illicit cash flows completely legally through Wall Street banks, through others, into the legitimate financial system, which ends up corrupting our democracy. And one of the things I want to highlight here with all of these excellent panelists is just about pretty much whatever cause you care about. If you are on the other side of the moneyed elite, then you're losing. And there's a reason for that. And it's all because of money and the way that it pervades our interests, how our legislators are, who they respond to, whose calls they answer, so much more. It's something that Crystal and I try to highlight so much on our show daily. And you really feel like you're fighting against a behemoth sometimes. But luckily, there are organizations like this, and there are excellent people that I would just want to introduce to all of you here. So let's go around and thanks, Mike, obviously, for that great introduction. I want everybody to just have a chance to introduce themselves briefly, just, a couple 30 seconds or more. Jodi, why don't we start with you?
Sure. My name is Jodi Newell. I'm a volunteer with Wolfpack, New Hampshire. I'm also a national coordinator for Wolfpack and on the leadership committee.
And then Ti-Hua?
I'm the climate change investigative reporter for TYT Investigates, which is the news section of the Young Turks.
Mm-hmm. Jim?
Former Republican state senator, New Hampshire, ran for U.S. Senate both as a Republican in the primary in both 2014, 2016, experienced directly and indirectly, and as an elected legislature, the power of money and its ability to completely distort quality decision making. And whether you're on the right or left, as you point out, Saagar, it leaves regular voters at the back of the bus.
Antroinette, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Antroinette Worsham, and I'm a mother of 2 type 1 diabetics, one whom passed away due to rationing her insulin, and the founder of T1 Diabetes Journey in Cincinnati, Ohio.
And Manu, go ahead.
Hey, all. I just graduated from Berkeley, and I am the CEO of Bridge USA, and we're focused on reinventing civic engagement in college campuses and getting young people engaged in constructive ways. And it's wonderful to see some of the people that were there. I don't know if everyone was there in January when it was freezing outside of Capitol Hill and that corruption speech. There we go. So nice to see Jim and Jodi from that.
Yeah, right.
At least we're not freezing this time.
Yeah. Yeah, we are not. We are comfortably all at home. No, I think it was really important to bring all of you together. And I think one of the things I respect most about the panel and about this conference and this work is everybody likes to point to money in politics really as if it's, towards their pet issue about one particular thing. But you have to broaden it out and look at scopes. One of the things that we talk a lot about on Rising is about systems and power and about how they're designed and about how power accumulates and it spreads out. And its sole goal in often cases is just to perpetuate itself. And in many cases, people who are part of active corruption, people who are part of the machine, so to speak, in many cases, they don't even know that they're corrupt. They don't know that they're participating in corruption. They're just following orders, so to speak, and it rolls downhill. And so it often is very difficult to say, where does this all begin? I mean, how do you stop it? I mean, when cash is flowing from one person to another and you have compounding variables, which all influence and create a system where if you ask Americans today, they don't like what's happening and they know what the issue is. Everybody with eyes can see it, but nobody actually knows what to do about it. So Jodi, I want to start with you. Let's just talk a little bit about your work, your story, about how you've seen special interests kind of corrupt our democracy, and what are the issues in particular you want to highlight for people?
Sure. I guess the best thing to start off is with my story. And what really brought me into this and opened my eyes to how bad it is. So on Christmas Eve, 2008, I lost my fiance, my children's father. This was about 2 weeks before my youngest was born, and my oldest was about a year old. So he had an addiction to heroin. He overdosed 10 feet away from our youngest and I on the other side of a closed door. Mm-hmm. So it was of course a haze after that, and kind of dealing with everything, the fallout. I expected something to happen. Now at this time, this was kind of the beginning of the opiate crisis as it arrived in the suburbs, kind of thing, right? I like to specify that because we know that the overdose crisis has been going on a lot longer, and people just started paying attention when it hit the suburbs, right?
Right.
But this was at the very beginning of that, right? So I expected, okay, everybody's going to, we're going to mobilize, we're going to stand up, we're going to do something about this. And I'm expecting things to happen and da, da, da. But the people who were in power, while they would pay lip service, there was a lot of talk about it. There weren't a lot of resources provided, and there certainly wasn't, even the resources that were provided were not the right kind of resources. So the one thing, or at least one thing that really stands out to me is the way that everything kind of happened, right? He was pulled over. He had a whole lot of pills, and he had heroin, okay? OxyContin and heroin. What happened from that point was he was faced with a mandatory minimum of 15 years. Now, like I said, we had at this time a 3-month-old, right? So can you imagine being in that situation? His addiction, his substance use had developed very quickly. So we just realized this is when the whole family found out, and for the next few months, we were in court all the time. We were trying to do recovery things. But we were constantly with this overhanging threat of the criminal justice system. And if you think about it, think about not being able to see your newborn son for 15 years, okay, aside from through glass. Of course, during that time, we became pregnant again. And, of course, that compounded it. So kind of looking back at this, I on a personal level looked at it and thought, there's something wrong with this. This is not helpful. I don't understand why this is the way that we handle this. And of course, since then I've started looking into it. And if you look at any type of academic research, if you look at any type of data on how we should handle the substance use disorder, it explicitly says that criminalizing it is the wrong thing to do, right? Criminalizing this issue is the exact wrong thing. What it does is it takes away community. It takes away your family. It destroys your friendships and your family relationships and all these kind of things. What it does is the exact opposite of what works. Well, now why do we keep pursuing this criminal route? Why do we keep going with this war on drugs mentality? Well, what it comes down to is the people who have the voice, the people who are in the room. Let me just put it that way. The people who are in the room, because they donate large sums of money. Big Pharma has for a long time been the very top donor. They also have lobbyists. And so the lobbyists are the ones who are in the room when these decisions are being made. There are industries that are directly profiting off of this. Now, of course, we can all point to the pharmaceutical industry. I have a problem with pointing to one boogeyman, because it's not just one; it's a holistic issue. There are a lot of things that go into it. But yes, that was a big player. And at this point, we've realized that that they definitely pushed these pills. And where did they push them? In McDowell County. This is a place that is economically devastated. This is a place because the coal industry is gone. So now all these people who, right, whatever. So it's not, I feel like it is not a coincidence that it went into an economically struggling community, right? So we know that they had a hand in it. And then when we look at what are the repercussions for that industry? Well, money, which is funny because that's speaking their language. That's doing the cost of business. So why is it that when someone who is on the street corner, who is dealing drugs, probably to support their own habit, is facing a 15-year mandatory minimum, when the people who destroyed communities, destroyed families, destroyed my family, took away my children's father? Why is it that none of them go to jail? They get to spend the money that they already have, that they've profited handsomely off of. That's what they're going to do. Oh, great, good. That's really great repercussions. Go on doing your business. That's fine. I think that what it really comes down to is one mantra that I have with another organization that I volunteer with is the people who are closest to the problem should be the closest to the solution. Because the people who understand what's happening, they know how to actually fix it. And so why are we going headlong and just, exacerbating this issue instead of listening to the people who know how to actually address and fix the issue and save lives? Why are we doing that? Because money. Because the people who have the money are the people who are in the conversation. So that's why I'm here in a nutshell.
Jodi, no, I mean, it's such an important story, Jodi. One thing I just want to ask you, though, is that it's important, I think, to understand there is that you found the common denominator to be money. I mean, obviously, I think there are a lot of organizations talking about the opioid crisis and drugs. You chose to focus in and zero in on that particular one. Why this broader structural critique and not something more narrowed in for you? Why did you see it that way?
Well, that's interesting. I'm trying to kind of understand your question. And I think really what it came down to for me, and if I'm understanding your question correctly, is that it was a natural instinct. It was kind of my observation from being a person who went through this situation. Let me just explain. Let me just actually tell another very short story to kind of explain one thing that really pushed me into the systemic perspective, right? We adopted an area for Corey. So it was in memory of Corey and all the stuff. And it was this area that had been completely run down. And it was being used, unfortunately, for drug use. So there would, most commonly be people who are going there to use drugs. This is in our hometown. It is actually a beautiful place. It's overlooking the Boston skyline with the water in between and all this kind of stuff. So I decided that I was going to adopt it. We had cleanup days. We did all this stuff. Now, one day, this is after about 3 years of adopting this place. So it's that time where, as a single mom, it's in between dinner time and bedtime. And I asked my dad, can you please watch the kids for an hour so I can just go hang out, just relax and debrief. So I did. And I went to, we call it the Ledge, this place that we had adopted, but it was raining. So I sat in my car. So all right, I'm sitting in my car and we were planning on doing homeschooling. So I'm looking at homeschooling programs and blah, 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 and kind of doing research on my phone, just sitting in my car. Now, a friend of mine came by, and as often happened, because I was there all the time, picking up trash, doing the landscaping, painting stuff, and, all the stuff. As often happens, somebody, a friend of mine passed by, saw me there and stopped, pulled in, act like he was going to hit my car, ha, 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 whatever. Well, he stops for a minute and, chats. He gets in my car because it's raining. So he gets in my car and chats for, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 minutes or something like that. And then he gets out and he goes on his way. Well, shortly after that, the rain kind of calmed down a little bit. It's just at dusk, so it's just right before getting dark. And I thought, oh, I'm going to go look because somebody had left this beautiful little painting of a sailboat. It was leaning up against the tree that had the memorial thing. So I said, oh, I'm going to go check that out. So I go, walk over there. And then I get back to my car. And when I got back to my car, I realized that out of this whole parking lot, this single man by himself parked right next to my car. So I have to go in between our cars to get to my driver's door and get in, right? So I'm thinking, well, this is strange. That's kind of creepy. There's a whole rest of the parking lot. It's getting dark at this point. I'm like, okay, I'm out of here, right? So I get in my car and I go to pull out, and this car that was in the neighbor's driveway, I know him very well. I thought it was him. He backs out like he's coming down. Now I stop to wait for him, allow him the space to go. And instead of passing by me, this, just black sedan comes and pulls up in front of me. Then another car, the car that was next to me, pulled up behind me, and another car pulled up on the left. So there's a stone wall on one side. There's one car blocking me in on the front, one on the back, and one on the side. There were 4 unmarked police. These are unmarked police cars. I came to find out I had no idea. I had this man who had just driven into my car, who I thought the neighbor was. I'm all out of sorts, and he runs up like I can only describe like a bear. And he was angry with me. And I didn't know. He says, what did you throw on the floor? What did you throw on the floor? Well, my car was impeccable. All I had was my son's backpack that I had, thrown a notebook in, because I usually write my journal, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, through this, just to kind of summarize, because I don't want to take too much time. I want to, make sure everybody has something. But what had happened was this was the opiate task force. And they had assumed that this was a drug deal. So they kept me, a single woman, maybe 31 at the time or something, 32 at the time. They kept me blocked into a dark parking lot for 45 minutes, screaming at me while I cried. Literally everything I said was an indication that I'm on drugs. I was crying. Why are you so emotional? Just all these things. And so I think that was essentially what made me realize that we are treating people, even to the point where they searched my car when I said no. I think that I have basic rights. I don't like to even tell the story because I know so many people have it so much worse. But I think what we're doing is that we are treating people. We're essentially dehumanizing people. I would use that strong of a word. We are dehumanizing people based on a health issue, which is substance use disorder. And then we are pursuing solutions that we think are solutions to that problem, but we're allowing the dehumanization of people. And so that's what led me down that road, essentially.
Well, thank you, Jodi, for telling that story. And that's just an important example about how money can impact that. Let's zoom out a little bit more. Ti-Hua, I think we should go to you. Let's talk about some of your reporting at TYT Investigates, how it exchanges with climate change, and what role have you seen? Maybe if you could give us some specific examples here about money in politics and how it has impacted the issue of climate change that you cover, some specific types of legislation, things that should have been done, which weren't done. Just tell us about that.
Okay, I will. I just wanted to tell Jodi that a family friend, 26-year-old, very close family friend in Tennessee, just overdosed. And just a couple of months ago. And he was like the nicest person, really nice kid. And, so I feel some of, obviously not all, but some of what you're going through. So the problem is certainly a lot more widespread than I think most people realize. And so, getting back to the question, so when I report on climate change, it's, I say now that I think we need to start calling it climate crisis, soon to be climate catastrophe. Even the experts are saying it's happening a lot faster than any of them even anticipated. I think you got to be blind and deaf and dumb not to realize we're in a climate crisis, because you look at the wildfires in California, the dual, triple hurricanes going into the Greek alphabet, the flooding in Texas, the potential drought, even the pandemic, which a number of scientists point out maybe because of the reduction of wildlife, so that more wildlife, basically interacts with each other and passes diseases. So I think everything's pointing to that, and what's happening basically is the wealthy companies, in particular the fossil fuel companies, in particular the oil companies, control the message because they have the most money. I remember asking a financial analyst, why is it that so many banks have invested in the last previous quarters to fossil fuel companies? And he said, it's simple. They gave us the biggest returns. And so he said, it's, and that's part of the fundamental problem, I think. I'll address it a little bit more, but I think we have to change the metric. The fact is, when you have companies always talking about the quarterly profit, so if you're a CEO of any company and you don't have that quick return on the quarterly profits, then you're out of work. They're going to take you out as a CEO. There should be new metrics that say, what are the long-term results? So I'll give you another example in terms of, like, I'm sure everybody, if you notice it, everyone here sometime today is going to touch a piece of plastic. Well, every piece of plastic that you touch right now at this point is not being recycled. Now, you look at the recycling, there's that little triangle at the bottom that goes 1 to 6. Right now, they recycle the 1. That's the belief. Sometimes the 2. 3, 4, 5, and 6 is not recycled at all. And when China stopped taking the U.S. recycling because they have too much of their own now, we've had nowhere to put it. So it's being sent to a number of other, primarily Asian countries, and they're dumping it in the ocean. That's why in the Pacific right now, we have the size of Texas, a plastic island. So every piece of plastic you throw away today is ending up in the ocean and ending up in our food chain, because now the sea life is starting to eat it, and it's ending up in the fish. That's not a political thing. That should be basically on science, on the facts. The problem is that even the scientists, the people who have the vested interest, in particular the fossil fuel companies, have hired some of these climate deniers and given them a lot of promotion. I wonder how many people here realize that the United Nations IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, had 2,500 scientists say that we are in a climate crisis, that we have to recognize that the Earth is warming up too much and it's going to be catastrophic and possibly irreversible by 2050. And a lot of people aren't aware of that, but yet for a lot of local TV local TV news, there have been, especially in particular at Fox, there have been a number of climate deniers on because they are funded by the fossil fuel companies. Give you another example on plastics again. I mean, one of my pet peeves. Okay, the plastics right now. There have been a lot of commercials saying how wonderful it is to recycle plastic. That's true if it were actually happening, but it's not happening. The reason behind that is a lot of the fossil fuel companies funded those commercials that said we're recycling. So people would think, yes, we're recycling. I can use plastic. And plastic is made from petroleum products. And that's, again, the profit motive. And I think we need those new metrics. And to understand all this, I think a lot of you have probably seen the show Mad Men. Well, think of Mad Men in 1954 in the Plaza Hotel in New York City. The tobacco industry had asked, what are we going to do? Because it's becoming more and more clear that smoking causes cancer. In this meeting in the Plaza Hotel, all the PR people hired by the tobacco company came up with a plan that is being used by almost all the wealthiest companies. And that is not to deny something is true, but to raise doubt, merely to raise doubt. And that was the whole plan by the tobacco companies, just raise doubt about whether or not it's absolutely proven that smoking causes cancer. And that lasted for almost another 50 years. And that is the plan that is being used by a lot of major companies now who are being faced with, scientific fact that we are in climate crisis, really. They're saying, just raise doubt. And because they have the money to hire the people, to pay for the advertising, that's skewering basically what the public sees. It's kind of like going to trial and only hearing one side. You're going to trial for murder, and all the jury is hearing is the prosecution side, not the defense side, or vice versa. Either way, the point is you really cannot get the whole story because they control basically the messaging.
Mm-hmm.
That's one.
I just have one.
Also, obviously, the lobbying too, because what Jodi was talking about. Because one of the stories I did was about how the lobbyists from Aiken Gump, which is one of the, if not the largest lobbying firm in Washington, D.C., met with, through a teleconference, with the North American oil and gas section of Morgan Stanley. And I got a hold of their report, including the audio. And it's like being a fly on the wall. And they're talking about, well, what are we going to do? Well, we'll talk to this congressman, we'll talk to this senator, and I know this guy from before. And that whole connection and the people, once they leave Congress, they're back into going right to lobbying firms. And that's something that needs to be changed. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean that was actually one of the things I was going to follow up with. The second one I wanted to. This is something I know Crystal cares a lot about, so I just want to represent her perspective. Is the idea of greenwashing? Like you have some major Fortune 500 companies, they'll go out and like sponsor like a like a big climate thing, and then go and will pollute the environment, or will go and directly contradict their principles. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Right after my story about Aiken Gump meeting with Morgan Stanley, I don't know if it's because of my story, probably not, but possibly, Morgan Stanley issued this worldwide messaging that I happened to see on Twitter. And then it was not only on Twitter, but they had it on all these social media platforms, saying that Morgan Stanley announces we're going to be doing $800 million dealing with sustainable programming and sustainable. And then I retweeted that and noted that while they're doing the $800 million, which is great, glad to hear it, you're doing $31 billion in the opposite direction for companies that don't have any sustainable renewable things. But because you have the messaging, and because you can go buy all the messaging on the social media platforms, et cetera, and have a whole entire PR firm running that versus one, investigative reporter at TYT investigates, what message is going to be heard out there. It's going to be heard from that Morgan Stanley. And I know that a hedge fund person that I know he works for hedge funds. He says that every major financial company, every major hedge fund has what they call, I don't know exactly what each company calls it, but it's their little green section. And it's considered the least desirable position for any new financial analyst or financial person to be on. It's basically their way to say, yes, we're dealing with the climate crisis. But the real 90-something% of the company is working on things that don't help the climate. But This is the little thing that every company now has. It's basically, here's our green section. It's our diversity section in essence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that one was a particularly important one to highlight when we're talking about money. Jim, I want to get you in here. Now we talked about two separate, areas. I want to get, maybe a different perspective here. Your issue is about fiscal responsibility. How do you see money in politics impacting fiscal responsibility in politics, particularly from a state like New Hampshire, where you're from, where that's kind of a core ethos to that state's budget? And more, just describe your experiences having worked within the legislature, having seen corporate influence kind of contradict what many conservative and Republican congressmen will pay lip service to, but will sell out on the back end.
Well, what we see is that the relationship between money and politics is not over ideology and which party it is. It's the endless pressure by entities, people, companies that have money to buy politics. Their interest is not in improving democracy, their particular ideology slant. It's getting spending, tax breaks, regulatory favors, et cetera, for their particular interest group. And because they don't care about spending and debt and impact on future generations and kids and grandkids, they don't care about any of that. The deficit and debt is going up. But I'm gonna broaden this, because actually the headline on why I'm here, what I'm really working on behalf of both this organization and American Promise, I'm on the board of that, and Take Back Our Republic, I'm New England chair of that, is why is there this incredible disconnect between Republican voters, a supermajority of whom, 2 out of 3 Republican voters, want this amendment that we're working on here this weekend at this Warrior Workshop. They want the amendment, their 28th Amendment, to put limits on on campaign money. Why did 2/3 Republican voters support this? And why, on a bill to do exactly this in Congress, why is there only one Republican co-sponsor? Nearly every Democrat is on board on this issue, reflecting the views of Democratic voters and all voters. And why is a supermajority of Republican voters behind this thing, but Congress not? So I'm here to talk about it, and debt deficits is one of them. But what arguments are moving elected Republicans to get on board on getting this done? Because this won't get done whether you want a direct amendment drafted by Congress. You got to get 2/3 of members of Congress on board. It's going to take a lot of Republicans. If you're going to do it through the states, as Wolfpack is working on, we have to get a lot of Republicans in state legislatures, conservatives, on board in this thing. So what arguments are working? I'm going to touch on 3 of them. I don't have a lot of time here, so I'm going to click on a note to everyone, which is a bullet point list of what arguments are working with conservatives. 3 categories. Number 1, crony capitalism is displacing free market capitalism. That bugs conservatives some, and it should. Second is the gutting of federalism and the 10th Amendment. And third is the weakening of U.S. national security. All of these 3 problems that animate conservatives are driven. Fundamentally underlying them is this corrupting campaign money system, starting with crony capitalism. We conservatives like free market capitalism. It's bestowed greater wealth, prosperity worldwide, invented here in America, than any other economic system in human history. We've got the current system of pay-to-play, concentrated money politics has mutated free market capitalism, all the benefits we've accrued into crony capitalism. Data point, Sunrise Foundation, $760 return for every dollar invested in campaign spending and lobbying in the form of regulatory favors, tax loopholes, regulatory capture, loan guarantees, supply contracts. $760 return to companies playing in the play-to-pay game in Washington for $1 spent on this. So play-to-pay is so much more profitable now under crony capitalism than slugging it out in the free marketplace with better products and services. And so what you're seeing in the U.S. economy, and this really bothers free market capitalism, we're seeing a decline in innovation, new business formation, small business formation. They're all going down. Market concentration, oligopolies are increasing and prevailing. We have an issue that animates particularly populist conservatives. We have crony capitalists have set policies. I know this is very controversial for people on the left, but you have crony capitalists want increased immigration. So we have much more legal immigration, much more illegal immigration that we had in decades past. And it's suppressing wages for workers. We have H-1B programs displacing U.S. technical workers. This animates, and this should bother people across the spectrum. This policy animates populism on the right and on the left, and people who are concerned about populists getting elected in Western democracies ought to be reflecting in this. Finally, young people, a majority of young people now in the U.S. favor socialism over free market capitalism. So this bugs conservatives. The second issue, which we find is very, very effective in our state level organizing, is the gutting of the 10th Amendment. We want the 28th Amendment to put controls back, to restore the ability of Congress and the states to control political money, because the 10th Amendment is being gutted. What we have now, the 10th Amendment provides for any powers not expressly delegated to the U.S. government is reserved respectively to the states or to the people. And this is in the Constitution. Our framers put it there. It's written in our Constitution because we are the United States of America. We differ from state to state. We have different economies. We have different climates. We have urban, rural differences. We have different needs and viewpoints. And the founders, the framers, our Constitution was wise to allow states and localities for power to be distributed downward to where closer to where people are elected, closer to where people can have impact over this. So what we're getting by the big money system, we are suppressing this. I'll give you an example. We have increasingly, since Citizens United 10 years ago, we have big money increasingly targeting swing states, swing districts, even state legislative races, intensively targeted from out-of-state money. So you have a very small handful of people who live and work in places like DC and New York and California, determining candidate viability in these swing states. So 2020 data,
Right.
median incumbent US Senator, 60% of their money out of state. Big numbers. Jeanne Shaheen, incumbent, Democrat, New Hampshire, 81% of her money, 2020 out of state. Susan Collins, Republican, Maine, 91% of her money out of state. I ran for, as I mentioned, 2016 US Senate, $132 million spent in our small state of New Hampshire on that US Senate election, decided by 1,700 votes, 95% of that money out of state. So we have this tiny handful of people running the system. It's stripping local control, and our laboratories of democracy, where we test and replicate things that work, we're shutting down our laboratories of democracy. And finally, this is the bigger one that I need to raise, because this is less talked about as an animating force for conservatives to get on board. The crony capitalist big money system is the greatest single threat to U.S. national security. This topic has to be developed. That's why I sent a hyperlink to everyone on this to get into the details on this. So just very quickly going over this, there's a study just released by the Alliance for Securing Democracy. We have covert, hidden foreign money now clearly impacting the outcome of U.S. elections. This is illegal, okay? We have enemies of the United States, Russia, China, Iran, influencing Russia heavily in 2016. China's coming in more. Iran is doing it. They're shaping policy. They are determining which candidates get elected, and they're animating strife inside the United States. I'm going to skip down to the next aspect of this problem: foreign money. This is U.S. national security tie. The next thing we've got is procurement pork in defense technology. We've got sitting duck weapon systems that don't work, sucking trillions of dollars long term. This is a net present value out of our taxpayers' pockets, weakening U.S. national security. If you're a conservative Republican, this is one of the fundamental doctrines of conservative republicanism. We want a strong U.S. national defense. When you're spending $1.4 trillion on the F-35, which is widely known not to work, continuing to spend on this thing, you are weakening U.S. national security. We have industry consolidation, Center for Strategic International Studies, 2017. There is no effective competition for over 80% of military aircraft. No effective competition. Why do we have military? Why do we have lack of competition here? Because of crony capitalism, as I mentioned, displacing free market capitalism. You have oligopolies forming, you have industry consolidation, and you have a weakening U.S. national security. We have this is a leaked study.
It all comes, Jim. I want to be able to just get everybody else in here, but thank you for these are all excellent points.
I'll just summarize here the matter of weakened U.S. national security, core concern for conservatives. This needs to be developed in much more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Really insightful there.
Can I ask Jim a question? I'm just out of curiosity.
Can we save it for the end, just so I can make sure the other two panelists have time to talk? Thank you. Great. No, it's all good. Yeah. Antoinette, I want to make sure if you can turn your camera on, or if you're ready to speak, just to talk about your experience, money in politics, how it affected, of course, the loss of your child, and just about some of the work that you do there on diabetes research. Antoinette? Okay. Well, we'll wait for her to come back. In the meantime, Manu, why don't we kick it to you? Why don't you tell us a little bit about, as a younger person, you lead this new organization. Just tell us about why you decided to get involved in this work, kind of what you and your organization are up to, and what are the issue areas that you care most about that you see as being impacted by money in politics? You got to unmute yourself.
Hey, thank you so much, and I'll keep it relatively short so we can squeeze in everyone. And I see Jim smiling because he's going to have to hear this a second time. And lots of people have heard this spiel a lot. But I'm going to customize it a little bit to where we are. It's a fascinating moment to graduate from college and enter this time and country. And I, every morning when I wake up and listen to your show, I got to get a dose of hope from somewhere else because there's a lot going on, man. And our work is specifically focused on how we can sort of equip the next generation. Just really quickly, in 2017, when I was a freshman in college, there were these huge protests because this guy named Milo Yiannopoulos came to campus. And at that time, there was just a deep, visceral reaction from not only the students on campus, but from outside agitators. And at that moment, people really started to spin this up as a free speech conversation. And across campuses, you had this free speech problem. But I sort of decided to look in a little bit deeper because I felt like we were missing a more deep root causal issue that was sort of occurring amongst young people. And that is that there's a very strong divide in how young people are approaching politics right now. And this divide is not an ideology. We actually think that ideological divides are fantastic. We need to have strong beliefs. That's what powers democracy. The divide that I'm talking about is a divide between those young people that are deeply feel deep resentment about the political system, feel deep dissatisfaction with how it's operating, and those on the other side that are completely apathetic and have disengaged, with the through line between this being that everyone is pessimistic. And so when you take a future generation, a generation of young people that are going to sort of take the mantle of leadership and are going to think about how we can address and importantly sustain a lot of the problems and sustain the solutions to the problems that we're talking about. And then you think about that entire generation feels highly disengaged and highly pessimistic about sort of the way the political system operates. That's got to give us some thought, because that means that we're shooting our democracy in the foot if the next generation is completely disengaged and unable to sort of challenge and meet those problems. When you think about a young person's life, I'm 21 right now. There are 4 major events that define the entire trajectory of everyone that's from age of 18 to 23. Those 4 events are 9/11, the endless wars, a financial recession, this pandemic, and deep social unrest. That's not a great sample size of progress. And so when you think about the historical backdrop and the common story of America that's often forwarded, we can't take it for granted that the notion of progress and development is something that's passed on generation to generation. There has to be deep sense of engagement, and we have to think about how we can actually reinvent that story to fit the moment and then provide hope for the next generation that they can tackle these problems. The reason why all of this links to corruption is because corruption in our political system, I think, does 3 things. I think first, makes the system extraordinarily irresponsive to our problems. Second, the system only serves a few portion of the population. And third, a corrupt system means that there's a deep brain drain from our politics. The smartest people that ought to be running our government are not running our government. They're joining Aiken and Gump and thinking about how we can make sure that the gas industry continues to fill its pockets. Yeah. So if you think about the overlay problem of this is how young people are thinking about our politics, and then you've got deep corruption that's already making a lot of their deepest fears come true, how can you expect a generation to get engaged? And that's where our work comes in. It's about thinking about creating an actual habit of and culture of civic engagement on campuses and actually disrupting and reinventing what it means to be a civically engaged young person. When you enter a college campus, the immediate thought of how we're engaging is you either join some sort of political club or you think about some sort of political trade organization. That means that young people are already starting off quite tribal in their mindset. The second way that you're engaged is there's no talent pipeline for when you're graduating college, that if you want to actually get engaged in government work, if you actually want to harness your social capital and not face a financial trade-off in actually joining government work, getting paid what I call ramen profitability, when you make enough money to eat three boxes of ramen a day, you're kind of screwed. And that means that there's not a lot of young people actually thinking about how they can shape and actually address the systems that you talk about. And so while the problem seems pretty structural, in my opinion, and I think it also seems pretty grave, frankly, I don't actually think the solution is that difficult. And specifically the solution of youth engagement and thinking about how we can actually improve the outlook of young people in our politics. And this is not about creating moderates or centrists. Again, the divide is not on ideology, it's on disposition. So when you frame the problem in that manner, Bridge's goal in our work is take the work that people like Mike are doing, take the work that you all are doing, and then actually package it in a way that allows young people to express and engage the specific tasks. So when you think about bridge chapters, right, the goal and idea of the chapters is extraordinarily simple. It's we got to create a space on campus where someone that disagrees with you has an easy time finding you. When we create these civic spaces on campuses that are disrupting the way that partisan mold politics think and actually facilitate engaged dialogue, discussion, but then the important next step is take collective action. The big insight that I found among young people over the past 4 years just traveling campuses is that young people are incredibly issue driven. They frankly don't care which party's in power. What they care about is what is being done to solve and address those issues. So just tying this all at the end is that when we think about reinventing and thinking about how we imagine a young person getting engaged, we've got to think early. And then we have to essentially have a doctrine of actual engagement that produces robust results, where when a young person gets engaged in politics, they can map their impact. When you think about, engaging local city officials, thinking beyond voting, when you can start to think about young people as more than just a voting block that we got to engage every 4 years and actually think about creating a lifelong habit of civic engagement, then you make sure that and you ensure that you don't just have electoral participation, but you have civic participation. And when you've got that civic participation, that's when you can actually realize the impact of these reforms. If you pass voting reform legislation, for example, in California, where I am, you can make it easier to vote. That actually doesn't necessarily correlate to increased turnout. Because if you're passing laws, but no one in your family's history, or you are thinking about how you're going to cast a ballot, it doesn't matter. And so this cultural push, which our organization is focused on, along with a reform push, they both are equally necessary and needed. And we can't lose sight of the need for that cultural reform. Because if you don't build that social and civic fabric that harnesses the power of democracy and actually delivers it to the people at the bottom, it doesn't matter how many laws you pass. Young people are being disenfranchised and dislocated, not because they can't vote, frankly. It's because that habit and culture doesn't exist. And when we can frame that problem as that, I think that you can even make things like voting reform and big money in politics, not just democratic issues, which are at the moment, but American issues. The final insight that I'll just leave you with is that if you were to think about the younger generation right now, there's 3 ways that I would describe them. First, they have incredible moral ambition because, again, their entire lives have been defined by those 4 major events, at least the ones that are politically engaged. Second is that they're incredibly issue driven. And third, young people tend to be more altruistic, at least this generation does, because it appears that we're growing up with the crises of economic immobility combined with things like opiate crisis and criminal justice as not just being backwater issues, but actually frontal issues. And so we've got to address them. And so that's where I'll leave you with is that there's a lot of hope in that the cocktail and character and foundation is set for young people to actually get engaged. But we've got to make sure that when we're combining and approaching these systems, we think about it both from a reform setting and a cultural setting so that you make sure that you give the leaders of tomorrow a seat at the table today. Thank you.
Really excellent work there, Manu. Really interesting what you're doing. I couldn't agree more. I can tell that you watch Rising. I can see some of what you're talking about.
I do disagree with some of it, but that's okay, right?
Hey, that's what the show is all about. Antroinette, if you're there, I'd love to be able to get you in here so you could share your perspective as well. I'm not sure. I think that one of the most important things, though, if in the meantime, there she is. Antroinette, thank you so much. Can you hear us?
I was on mute. I can hear you.
Oh, great. I would just love to be able to get your perspective in here as well, just given the work that you do and diabetes and obviously with your own personal story, if you could just share it with us.
Well, again, I'm a mom of 2 type 1 diabetics, and my daughter, she passed away in 2017 due to rationing her insulin. So I've spoken nationally in front of Congress. Mike has had me speak in front of the Capitol in January. He's done a couple stories on me. Really just sharing how the cost of pharmaceutical drugs is killing the American people. I believe time and time, different presidents, talk about, changing these laws and how pharmaceuticals are price gouging, but just nothing is being done about it. There's a lot of representatives in Congress and just people of the government, period, they're talking about it, but nothing's being done. So we're just hopeful that, in this next term, something will happen. Something will happen. We have to continue to fight. continue to use our voices, and again, be hopeful that, regardless of it being Republican or Democrat, we just need someone who is going to fight for the American people. I don't like to label one. We just again need the people in the government to fight for the American people, because that's why we vote them in. Is to fight for us and for change for everybody, not a certain category, right? We all need help, no matter how rich or poor we are. We all need help.
Yeah. Antroinette, one thing I'd love to hear just your perspective on is what you talked about earlier about how people will promise you one thing and then it never ends up happening. I mean, how frustrating is that, having been in your position? And just if you could, given your prominence, I mean, what was it like to see people who had promised you something not end up delivering? Because I think that's probably how so many Americans feel about this system.
Mm-hmm. It's frustrating, especially when I vote for somebody and, because of what they say they are going to do, but they don't do it. Again, it's frustrating, but I just continue to move, right? I continue to move forward, continue to do what I have to do for me and my family, and be hopeful. Be hopeful that one day there will be a change, no matter who is running our government.
Yeah. And I just want to make sure people know, I mean, what can Congress do to make sure that what happened to your family doesn't happen to any other family?
Pass those laws where, for healthcare, in a whole is affordable to the American people. There's so many things that are happening in America right now. There are so many laws that I know that we're trying to get passed. But right now we know the top priority is healthcare because of COVID, right? It's a pandemic right now. So just imagine how many American people are out there because they lost their job. They don't have medical coverage, right? So healthcare needs to be top priority in our government. Including, again, pharmaceutical, because guess what? If you're sick, you're going to need medicine, right? So you can go to the hospital and receive care and receive a bill. It can be sent to collections. But without that medication to heal you, or without that medication that you need to survive, there's nothing that can be done. I work in the healthcare industry. I adjust and write off every day, all day, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. But guess what? You can't go to the pharmacy and leave the pharmacy without paying for your medication.
Right.
So that needs to be the focus.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. So we only have, I think, 1 or 2 more minutes here. I just want to, again, draw the thread through all of these conversations of whether it's civic engagement, whether it's, how to get people on the right to care about it, whether it's climate change, the opioid crisis, and every particular one, we can just see in which a particular moneyed interest is able to co-opt messaging. I think that was one of the most important things, is the way that people message, and the way a particular moneyed interest can keep a system going, which they know to be bad. They can convince the public that it is not bad, or at the very least, they can convince lawmakers it is not bad. And that ultimately you can see a deep undercurrent running throughout America, whether it's America's youth, whether it's on the climate movement, whether it's in the opioid movement, whether it's in people who want to see change, populists, people I think Crystal and I would self-describe there. You can see that the current is there. And it's one of the most glaring examples of which the popular will for what I think all of us want, it's right there. I mean, we just want it. And yet the obstacle to it could also never loom larger. So I just want to thank all of you for sharing your perspective, and for Wolfpack for putting on, this event. I know Crystal was sad that she couldn't be here, but thank you to all of you. And Mike, thank you to giving us giving me the opportunity to help share some of their stories that we heard here today. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Saagar. You feel better, Crystal, if you're watching.
Yes. To everybody who is here today, these stories are all powerful. They're important. Saagar, excellent job. Somehow you did it. You got everybody in an hour. That's remarkable just in itself. You're obviously professional. You've done this before, huh?
Yeah, right on time too.
Yeah, look, this conversation could easily go another hour, right? I mean, with all the people on here and perspectives. So maybe next time we'll try to factor that in, right? And go a little bit longer to be able to dive into some of these things more, and let these panelists interact more. That would have been, I think, really cool. But we are trying to do a lot this weekend, as you can see from our agenda. It's very ambitious. So if you're out there, you're watching, you want to participate in this, you can just go to wolf-pack.com/workshop. We got all kinds of exciting stuff coming up today. Crystal, hopefully, will be back later to sing some Kara. Can you say it one more time for me, Ti-Hua?
Kara, K-A-R-A.
Kara.
Okay.
Karaoke, right?
Karaoke. Just like karate.
Okay.
Kara means empty.
That is going to be a tough one for me, but I'll try to get above for it tonight.
Just remember K-A-R-A.
Okay. And then we got some virtual pictionary coming up. Pictionary, Crystal, Tommy Chong, Jank, Anna, Greg Pallas, the founder of Pictionary. He swears he sucks at his own game, but we'll see. Yeah, thanks everyone so much. We've got another good panel coming up in just a few minutes. So stay with us. See you in
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.